Have you ever noticed that some people seem to get so much more from large language models like ChatGPT than others? A lot of that's down to the degree to which they've mastered prompt engineering. And today I'd like to share with you everything that I've learned about how to go from zero to hero as a prompt engineer. So here's a slideshow that I've put together. And the first thing we should clarify is what exactly is a prompt. And I don't think there are any prizes here. It's a written, spoken, or a multimodal command to a large language model. It's the way that we communicate with chatbots. And the aim of a prompt is to make sure that the output we receive from the model is relevant, accurate, and efficient. As teachers, I think that we've already got an inbuilt superpower when it comes to prompt engineering, because we spend all day, every day, offering detailed and hopefully clear instructions to our classes so that they can carry out the activities we've designed for them. It's the foundation of good teaching practice. And if you can communicate clearly to 25 or 30 pupils, you can definitely do it to one chatbot. I'm often asked what's the best large language model to use, and I, as I've said elsewhere, am model agnostic. I use a number of them. I have one or two subscriptions, so I currently subscribe to ChatGPT and to Claude, and the reason I do that is that ChatGPT was the first chatbot I came across, and so I'm really familiar with the interface, and it's pretty solid. Claude is amazing for long form writing, and it's becoming better. There's Claude 4 has just been released and it's an excellent model. Perplexity by Perplexity Labs is really useful for research primarily. It offers excellent citations. So if you're researching schemes of work or data and you want to see the origins of those sources, all large language models are doing that now, but Perplexity, that's its speciality. Grok by XAI, so this is Elon Musk's baby. I'm less comfortable using that, not just because of the politics of its founder, but also because I've just not had so many good results with it. Gemini by Google is fantastic, particularly if you go to AI Studio and use their free account there. And I'll probably do a separate recording all about Gemini and how to use it. And then if you were subscribed at school to the Microsoft suite, then you'll have access to Copilot. It's fine. It's getting better all the time. It's just recently integrated the native image generation from ChatGPT, from OpenAI. Many of these large language model companies cross-pollinate with one another. And then there's DeepSeek, which is the Chinese model, which has been causing ripples over the last couple of months. The reality is that these days, these models are close on the coattails of one another and vying for pole position. They're all pretty good. And my advice would be use whichever model you're comfortable with. And then once you are really familiar with the user interface, maybe mix it up and try something else. And whether you should go for a paid subscription or just move between the various models and use the free daily allowance is entirely based on your budget and the value you see. For me, I like to have the premium account on a couple of chatbots because it gives additional features and it means I don't need to worry about running out of token use. So typically you'll see that people go through 3 stages when it comes to the way in which they interact with large language models. Stage 1, we get these short casual inquiries. Stage 2 is when people start to find prompts that they like from other places and they cut and paste those templates and adapt them. And then stage 3, which is where we'll land by the end of today's presentation, is when you come to have a better understanding of how to frame a prompt, and then you can create bespoke prompts for specific use cases. So if we look a little bit more detail at this, stage 1, often people treat large language models like a search engine, like Google, and it is fed on most of the data of the internet, but it's not really designed to be a search engine. So you can do an inquiry like this, please give me some synonyms for immature, and you get a reasonable response back again. But you can't, if you're asking, for example, fact-based information, you can't be 100% certain that what you're going to get back is not an hallucination, imagined information. And I'll come back to that a bit later in this presentation. The other way in which stage one users tend to prompt is by using simple and unplanned prompts like this one. Give me a summary and study notes for the epilogue of The Whale Rider by Witi Ihimara. So this is a prose text that I'm teaching at GCSE at the moment, and I'm going to be using this one as a case study as I take you through stages 1, 2, and 3, so you can see how the better the prompt is, the better the output we'll receive. As a starting point, this is absolutely fine, but if you're finding sometimes that you're underwhelmed by the quality of the outputs, it might just be that your prompt isn't quite fit for purpose. So that takes us to stage 2, where you might find some examples of really useful templates that are out there, like this one, and there will normally be placeholders where you can fill in the details specific to your needs. So create a study guide for the epilogue of The Whale Rider by Witi Ihimara. It should be written for Year 11 IGCSE pupils. It should include an overview, chapter summaries, themes, useful quotations, and language and structural features. It should be formatted as a PDF and must be pupil friendly. So a lot more detail there, and it starts to cover a lot of the elements that we'll be looking at when I talk about stage 3, framing your large language model prompts. These are great, and as long as you are using them and you have a repository, your own library, you'll find that you'll have some favorites that you'll come back to again and again. And if you're at stage 1 at the moment, the transition from stage 1 to stage 2 prompting is really low entry in terms of effort. And to support that, I am going to include a link in the description to this video for a free prompt template library that I've put together specifically for teachers. It's a web-enabled resource that you can access at any time. It's entirely free, and it's not my own work. It's a compilation of some of the best templates that I've found in various places through my crawling of the internet, and I've used many of these to good effect. So have it with my blessing. Please play with it. If you like it or you find it of value, spread the word, and maybe leave a comment to tell me which ones you're using and what you're getting out of the model. And that takes us to stage 3, which is really where we start to have more control over our prompting, and it's to use a prompt framework. And I like this 5-stage framework. So we go from giving some information about context and adding any resources that might be useful. We give clear instruction, including the role we'd like the large language model to play and the goal, what we want it to do. We specify the output format, what we want it to look like. We offer any ideas about rules or constraints, what we don't want it to do, or things we want it to be mindful of. And then finally, we might attach some examples of the kind of output that we're looking for. If we turn our attention to the context specifically here, if we flesh out the Whale Rider prompt in a bit more detail, it might look like this. So I'm building a revision guide for Year 11 pupils studying The Whale Rider by Witi Ihimara. It will be used as an independent revision resource. Pupils have read the novel and completed a scheme of work. They are sitting the Edexcel IGCSE English Literature exam. I've attached a PDF of the novel for reference. So that's its context, and notice that I'm attaching anything that I think might be useful that it will be able to use to build out the resource. That leads me just to have a brief aside here and talk about this idea of multimodality. A couple of years ago, the only way you could interact with a large language model would be through text. You would type and it would respond in type. But things have advanced really rapidly, and now most of these models are multimodal. That means that we can have various kinds of input. So we can now type, but we could also speak directly to the large language model. Many of these models are enabled with a microphone feature. We can import images or documents or code snippets or links to websites, or in some cases, even video files. And the output is equally diverse. I just should say that it's not uniform across the board, so you need to get familiar with what your particular model is capable of receiving as an input and providing as an output. So then that takes us to the second part of our prompt, which is the instruction. And we're really going to be clear now about what we want it to do and what kind of a role we want it to play. So in this case, you're an expert educational resource designer. You should create a chapter summary of the epilogue along with study notes using the attached PDF to ensure accuracy. So I'm just reminding it that I want it to draw primarily on that PDF. And then to the output. I want it to be a PDF document with brief paragraphs of text separated by subheadings with the following sections. And then I name each of those sections in detail. And this is where I can really craft the shape and the format. So I don't need to do so much reformatting after I've got my basic response from the large language model. And then we come to the rules or constraints, and this will be specific for each use case. In my case, there's a film version of Whale Rider, and it's very different from the novel. And often the online resources that large language models will draw from leverage the film. And so you get this confused mixture of references to different character names or different events that do or don't happen in the novel. So I'm going to specify here, ensure the content is not based on the film version of the novel, which has significant differences to the original text. And then finally, I'm going to give an example. So I've attached here an example output which analyzes the prologue of the novel. Remember, I'm asking for the epilogue. Use this as a guideline for the format, length, depth of analysis, and tone of writing for your response. So this is where you can give a specific example of something you've done before. So if you're asking for an email, you might attach an example of your writing style. If you're asking for a lesson plan, you might attach an example lesson plan with something that you're comfortable with and happy with, and it will do its best to match that style. I'd like to talk a little bit more about this idea of attaching examples. If we don't give any example of the kind of output we're looking for, then we call that a zero shot. We're giving the large language model no clear guidance, and it's going to be fast in terms of prompting, but we've got far less control. What I've just described is a one-shot prompt. So we are giving one attached example to support the prompt we're giving. And you could do a few-shot prompt by attaching two or more examples, and this might work even better, but there is a constraint we need to bear in mind. And a lot of people don't know about this, and we're talking about context penalties. So this graph here shows the relationship between the length of the prompt on the x-axis and the accuracy of the output that we receive from large language models. Now you'll notice that the metric for length of input is in tokens. So what is a token? Well, basically a token is the base unit of the way in which large language models organize their data. And you can think of a token as about 0.7 of a word, because obviously words vary in length. So if you're prompting something with a relatively brief token length, say up to 1,000 tokens, then it probably won't have too significant an impact on the accuracy of the data. But if you cut and pasted huge swathes of text in to your prompt window, look at what happens. So if we take, for example, ChatGPT 4, it can drop by up to 20% accuracy once we get to 3,000 tokens. And it's really easy to do that if we're not careful. So we want to be mindful of making sure that our prompt is not too long or too short. If it's too short, we're likely to have less control. If it's too long, we're going to degrade the quality of the output. And this is true also for any attachments we place in our prompt. So between 0 and 5 attachments is probably fine. But once we attach multiple documents to our prompt, we see a comparative decrease in the performance of the large language model. So in other words, we want to prompt like a Spartan. We want to be efficient, minimalist, do exactly what is required, but no more. We should also just briefly talk about the difference between a conversational model and a knowledge engine. So large language models on their own can be really convincing, but they are not reliable. They are prediction machines, and they will predict what they think is the next most likely word that responds to the query you've made. And that means it can generate plausible hallucinations. And I'm going to give you a use case, a recent use case in the next slide. By contrast, a knowledge engine is something that's fixed, it doesn't change, and it's 100% reliable on the output it produces. So that could be something like a database, or access to an online encyclopedia, or a RAG system, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is just a posh way of saying if you attach a document and say use this document, then that's going to be its primary source. It retrieves information from that source first. So the best prompts combine the creative conversational potential of large language models with more reliable knowledge engines that it can be attached to or draw from. So that could be simply connecting it to the internet, or linking it to a database, or in an example of something like Notebook LM by Google, you can add multiple documents and then interrogate those documents rather than the general internet as a whole. So here's my case study. The Chicago Sun-Times in May of this year, so the 18th of May 2025, published a summer reading list for 2025 where it printed 15 recommendations of new novels that had just come to market. However, it turns out that only 5 of those were actually real books. 10 of them were AI hallucinations. And the writer, and I put that in inverted commas for obvious reasons, Marco Buscaglia, admitted that he had used AI in the generation of the article and then hadn't had any oversight or adaptation of the content. He'd just cut, pasted it, submitted it. And it's staggering that it got all the way through to publication without anyone checking it. But this is a good example of the ways in which AI has been and will continue to be misused. We need to remember its limitations as well as its potential. And then we need to think about the type of model that we're going to feed our prompt into. In many cases, a basic chatbot will do absolutely fine. But if we are asking the large language model to do something more nuanced or sophisticated, such as mine into data to find relevant patterns, or code out a code snippet, or do some higher order thinking and problem solving, then selecting a reasoning model instead is likely to have a better output. And by a reasoning model, what we mean is a system that's been designed not to be fast, but to take its time, to do additional thinking and to scrutinize its own output before it delivers it to us. And most of the large language models that are commercially available will have a reasoning model built into it. And you just need to look for a drop-down menu where you can select the model of choice and go for the one that looks like it's going to have inference compute time. And then finally, many of these models have deep research capabilities. So that is, they will go off and interrogate the internet and use multiple sources rather than just one or its own internal data sets. It's a bit like online crowdsourcing, and so the output's likely to be more nuanced and more reliable. So let's now put it all together and let's do a side-by-side comparison of a stage 1 and stage 3 prompt so we can compare the outputs. So here you can see the stage 1 prompt, and I've fed it into ChatGPT 4, and the output's quick. And given the limited amount of information I've given it, it's a pretty impressive generation. We have a summary. It's intuited that I will then want things like character development, symbolism, literary techniques, quotable lines. It's not bad, but in comparison, now I've pasted in the full 5-stage prompt, and I'm going to attach the 2 documents, the PDF of the novel and an example of the kind of output I'm looking for. I'm also going to select a deep research mode, and I could go up and choose one of these models instead, like the O3 reasoning model, but I'm actually going to stick with 4.0 so we get a clearer comparison between the two. Now, in this case, you'll notice that it asks me some follow-up questions. So it wants to know, do I want the PDF to include visual elements such as text boxes, icons for themes? And I don't want that. I just want the same style as in the example I've added. And then it's asking me, do I want to match the tone in terms of a balance between explanation and interpretation? And yes, I do. I want it suited to Year 11 pupils. And then finally, it's asking, do I want only to draw quotations from the epilogue or elsewhere? And I want to restrict the quotations, in this case, just from the epilogue. So I'm going to state that and then hit enter. And now it's entering the reasoning mode. And it said, yep, I'll reproduce that for you. It's clarified that it understands what it wants. And I've now jumped ahead a little bit because the reasoning model can take a little while. In this case, it took 3 or 4 minutes. But look at what we've got instead now. It's a much more comprehensive response. It adheres more closely to the specific outline that I wanted. It gives me the citations at the end, and I've got my downloadable PDF link. And when I click on that, here we have a really useful starting point, which of course I'd go in and adapt to suit my students' needs. And the only difference, it's the same model. The only difference was the quality of the prompt that I fed into the system. But even with a really good prompt, it doesn't mean that we're going to get the best output straight away. So if at first you don't succeed, we can stochastically sample instead, which just means we can rerun the prompt. And sometimes, because these conversational systems are creative, you can run exactly the same prompt 2 or 3 times or 4 or 5 times, and each time the output will be slightly different. So you can rerun the prompt and then cherry pick what you think is the best output. And even when you've done that, you should then closely examine what you've got and then iterate from your MVP, your minimum viable product. Specify any particular changes that you want and then resubmit that new prompt, and the large language model will iterate on the changes you've requested and hopefully get you closer to where you want to be. I ought to just say a little bit about data protection and GDPR, of course, because as educators, we are going to be handling sensitive information. And so it's really important that if we're using data that has student information on it, we strip out those identifiers from our prompts and use synthetic or anonymized data in our examples. So that's it. Everything that I've learned about prompt engineering in the last couple of years that I think will be useful for you as a teacher. If you found any value in what I had to share, please think about hitting the like button, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.